Hello, my name's Nathan Ward from the Big Story Trust, and earlier I caught up with Barry Birchall, who's the president of Christian Magicians UK. Barry, thank you ever so much for taking the time out this morning to catch up with me. For people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about your magic background.
I suppose I started magic just as a junior, as 5, 6 year old. To be honest, I saw David Nixon on TV, and he did what I know now as a sympathetic matchboxes, and he just put a matchbox on his hand and pushed a drawer in, and a drawer popped out on the other one, and that absolutely fascinated me. So I spent the next 3 or 4 years trying to work out how he did the damn thing.
Yeah.
I did work it out, and I didn't believe I'd worked it out correctly because my method was so simple. It's only as an adult I found out that that's the way it's done. So I've always messed about with magic as a youngster. I've done some magic semi-professionally, but I'm not really a performer as such. Most of my magic's actually been done in church. It started off in youth groups,
Yeah.
and I just found it quite a good way of chatting with kids. They were far more interested. Years ago, I mean, we're probably a similar age, so we went to youth clubs, and at the end it was the epilogue, or the God slot, or whatever you want. Nobody wanted to sit in for that. However, I found by just sticking in a few tricks in there, people, engaged a bit more.
Excellent. And you're the president of Christian Magicians UK?
That's right, yeah.
What got you involved in that?
Oh, for years, it was the Fellowship of Christian Magicians at the time when I joined, and I did sort of steer away from it. I was involved with Paul Morley and Tricks of Truth, and he did quite a few little sessions for Fellowship of Christian Magicians, and I was involved with them locally, and a number of people had said to me, come to the conference, but I thought, a bunch of Christians doing magic, that's got to be, it's a nut job, that, isn't it? These are going to be complete geeks in many, many ways. And one year, Paul Morley was struggling with his stall and asked me to go with him. And it was subterfuge, really. He just wanted me to get there. And it's been great ever since. It was nothing. It did contain nuts, let's put it like that. However, they were great nuts,
Yeah.
And it's been fantastic. I go every year, and I won't miss it.
Excellent. And you've been around gospel magic for a few years now. What's some of your reflections on it, how it's changed or how you've kind of seen it develop?
I think it's changing all the time, to be honest. When I first joined the Fellowship of Christian Magicians, I'd seen some very, let's say, poor gospel magic. So I saw it as two types of people. There was evangelists using magic as a tool, and there was magicians using magic, well, as a tool, but the emphasis was for the magicians, the magic trick, and the emphasis for the evangelists was the message. So I saw quite a lot of weak magic. I'm not saying bad magic, I'm just saying weak magic, but strong messages off one group of people, and quite the reverse from another group. I think that's changed over time. I think the gospel element has reduced. I don't see that as much now. I see fairly strong magic, and I see good gospel content. At first, I was quite scathing of people that did a magic tricks and then stuck a message on the end of it. That didn't work for me. But I saw Steve Price, who you've already interviewed, and he did quite a clever thing. He did a trick to illustrate a particular aspect of Christian living or the gospel. He then linked that to his experience, and then did another trick. And it was almost like a chain of magic tricks that he was just using as an illustration for his story. I thought that was excellent. So I think magic has changed. It's less cheesy gospel magic now. And there's more professionalism in it, and there's more mainstream magic being used rather than made props for Christians, if that makes sense.
And what would you say is good magic?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? I think any magic is good magic. this badly performed magic. I think for me, good magic is a magic trick that makes sense. So I've never liked the ambitious card routine, because putting a card in a pack and bringing it to the top, and then putting it in the pack and bringing it to the top, and then doing that until you kill the trick just doesn't work for me. Why would you put a card in the pack and then bring it to the top? So a trick's got to make sense to me, really. So that's what I would call good magic. But there's some great magic out there.
Yeah. And for you, you've talked about there being, and you're not the only person that I've spoken to. I was speaking to Scott Penrose the other week, who's the president of the Magic Circle, and he was talking to me about gospel magic, and he was saying, just as you said, you either get good magic and a poor message, or poor magic and a good message, but he's never seen the two come together. So what's interesting for me is you describe for you what's good magic as something that makes sense, then that would lend itself to gospel presentations as something that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Yeah, I think
but
you're
it's
right.
Interesting how it doesn't happen quite often.
I think people just perhaps get too hung up on the message. I remember one of the first things I saw as a gospel trick, as an adult, as a gospel trick, was somebody was telling me they showed me a trick, and they said I did this because I was asked to do a trick to illustrate redemption, and I thought that's how do you illustrate redemption? And then I was shocked to find out that it was actually illustrating a redemption between 5 and 11-year-olds. And I thought, that's a concept that's really hard for an adult to understand, let alone a child. And I just said, why don't you just keep it simple and just tell them that God loves them? That's got to be the message.
And I think personally, sometimes people complicate the message and they complicate the trick, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you can do it with a double lift, do it with a double lift. It's kind of my theory as well.
I was doing a card trick I do quite a lot, and it's just a card in Mousetrap. You've probably seen it. Once again, Steve Price. I was doing it with Steve Price, and I was culling cards. So I was doing it quite complicated, and he just said to me, do you know what? Glue 2 cards together and use it as a marker. And I thought, how simple is that,
Tell us a little bit, Barry, around how you've used it within a church context and how you haven't used it in a church context as well.
There's been a few ways I've used it. I think the biggest sort of run I had on doing gospel magic was at youth events. So it was just very simple illustrations just to get over a very simple message. I did an event for Alan Price, and that was perhaps about 20 minutes of stringing magic together just to illustrate. It was my story, I suppose. But that wasn't. It's hard to say the difference with that. That was very proppy, to be honest. So I was using things like change bags and things like that. And I don't normally use that sort of thing. I tend to use cards. So I've used them in family services. I've used magic in youth services. I've emceed a few events. So I've used magic just as little fillers in between, the acts and things like that. And now I tend to just do... In my own church, I've just stood up and done a magic trick. No gospel message whatsoever. It's just I'm playing about with this. I want to run it past some people, and I've done the trick. So I've used it in different ways in the church. At my own church, it's very different because I don't particularly have to worry too much about things going too wrong.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And when you get asked to go to a church that isn't your own, what sort of things in your mind during that initial phone call or email exchange? What things are you trying to work out?
I suppose it's the demographics of the church. So, are we talking about working with children here? We're talking about working with families. Is it predominantly going to be the older people? But saying all that, I just tend to do the same sort of stuff. I've never really worried too much about whether it's a Christian or a non-Christian event, if that makes sense, because anything I do has got to have a very simple message. So my message will always be as simple as God loves you as you are. So that doesn't matter if it's somebody that's founded with a Christian base or just never heard, about Christianity before.
Excellent. And what are some of the issues that you've come across, Barry, as you've performed in different contexts?
I think I've had a few run-ins with people that have told me gospel magic is wrong, and I'm assuming they're Christians. I've never questioned them on their faith. That worries me sometimes when people come up with that sort of like ridiculous. Well, it's just ridiculous. They don't understand that what you do is it's a trick, Just as on a film, sort of like the greatest story ever told. Films like that, when they nailed Jesus to the cross, they didn't actually nail that guy to the cross. It was just a trick, it's an illusion. I've had an event where the children didn't react to something that children normally react to massively. So dye box routine. Now, once you start sliding that dye in the box, usually the kids are off the seat telling you how stupid you are for not understanding what's happening. And I'd gone to one particular church and the kids all sat there and I just didn't understand it. They were so quiet. And it turns out that that's just what the kids did in church. They weren't allowed to say anything. They weren't allowed to do anything. It made me change the trick drastically. I sat down with Paul Morley and just talked over that because it worried me that the kids didn't feel at home at church. I didn't change the trick. So I before I do the trick now, I spend a few minutes with different plastic bags with things written on them, or maybe a bag from Lewis's, and I'll ask the kids, what do you think was in the bag? So through that trick now, I spend 2 or 3 minutes just warming the kids up and just letting them know that it's all right to actually say something.
That's really important. Yeah. And it sounds like Paul Morley has not only influenced you, but been a bit of a mentor to you as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I was doing gospel magic for a long time, and I was the only person in the world doing that, as far as I thought. And I don't know what it was. One day I searched for tricks for truth. That sounds absolutely stupid, but I just put in my search engine tricks for truth, and it came up with tricks for truth. Found out that Paul lived less than 2 miles away from me.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what, I'll go up and have a chat with this guy, and that's what I did. So from then on, every Sunday we would get together and just play around with tricks, and so I think Paul's not necessarily mentor as such. We do very different types of magic, but he's certainly been a good person to bounce balls with.
Yeah. Do you think it's important that magicians have those sorts of people around them?
Yeah, and I think it's important that magicians actually critique themselves as well. So it's good to run tricks past somebody. Did that work? What did they do wrong? How did that go? So Paul was very good for that. But I think that's another problem gospel magicians have in particular. They think that they're the right person to do that particular job. And they need to really look at what they're doing and maybe video things and maybe have somebody to talk to. Because it's only when you get other people's opinions that you start moving on, you start developing.
Do you think, Barry, that sometimes magicians get caught in a rut and only see things from a magician's point of view and actually forget how an audience perceives something?
Well, the answer to that is absolutely yes. I think we all tend to do that. We only tend to change things. I'm just thinking personally, I do drop things from what I'm doing. So there are some tricks that I don't think are strong enough. I'll drop that. But a lot of people only do them changes when something goes wrong. Or In fact, sometimes don't even change it when it goes wrong. You know, you hear of people that said, "Oh yeah, and that goes wrong something like 3 times out of 10 for me," and you're thinking, "Why did you do that?"
Yeah.
No, so let's stop doing it if it's going to go wrong at some point. I think once again we get stuck in this rut of we're getting a message over, and maybe we don't have to use the best magic. Magic doesn't have to be polished to get the message over, and it does. You know, it really does. So yeah, I think more so in gospel magic, people get stuck in a rut and don't really change that.
Yeah. Excellent. And what advice, Barry, would you give to people starting out doing gospel magic?
What advice? There's quite a bit of advice. I would suggest that you'd never be satisfied that you're doing a trick to the best of your ability, because there's always room for development. Listen to what other people tell you. You don't always have to act on what people tell you, but do listen to feedback, and do ask for feedback. Don't just choose your best mate to give you feedback. Listen to what people are saying. And don't lose your goal. You know, if you are a gospel magician and you want to get a particular message over, don't lose that message. You know, think about your message and keep it simple. Don't complicate it with biblical language like, I don't know, just keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Excellent. Barry, thank you ever so much for taking the time to catch up with me this morning, and take care.